there's not very many people in the room, so please speak into the microphone so the people on the broadcast can hear you too.
Hello, my name is Corey Saltzman. I work at the Department of Water Resources.
Hi, my name is John. I'm with the DWR.
Hi, my name is Jamie Tipton. I'm with the Air Resources Board.
Monique Davis with the Air Resources Board.
Desiree Ramirez with DWR.
Jimmy Steele, Air Resources Board.
Monty DePalma, Air Resources Board.
Pam Loomis with Nossaman.
Jim Lee from DWR.
Elena Jordan from the City of Sacramento.
I'm Pablo Silva, an intern in Rubicon Water.
Craig Cross.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the purpose of today's workshop is to provide you information that can help you complete your application and to answer your questions. For people that are viewing the broadcast on the web, you can email questions at any time to the IRWM email address, and that email address will show up periodically throughout the broadcast. So first, I'm going to give you some general information that you should keep in mind when you're completing your applications. Then I'll hand off to Corey Saltzman, who will go into detail on the attachments that you're going to need to include. And then we also have Jamie Tipton from the Air Resources Board, who's going to go over some examples in the greenhouse gas emission reduction calculator. And then I'll come back and we'll close up for questions. So the goal of the 2016 Water Energy Grant Program is to fund programs or projects that save water and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're doing this in commercial and institutional settings and also residential settings that benefit disadvantaged communities. There's $19 million available. We'll award up to $3 million per application and not more than $6 million per applicant. And there's no cost share required. We've been getting a lot of questions about whether people are eligible applicants or not, so I wanted to emphasize that the eligible grant recipients for this solicitation are local agencies, joint powers of authority, and 501c3 nonprofits. These are the eligible devices that we can fund. These are the devices that you will find in the greenhouse gas emission calculator. So by inputting information for these devices, this is how you will estimate the greenhouse gas emission reductions that your projects will achieve. And then we'll take those values from your calculator. We'll get all the greenhouse gas emission reductions for all the applications and rank them high to low. And then look at the upper third and assign a value of high, the middle third, medium, the lower third, lower, or look for natural breaks. And we'll do the same thing with the water savings, rank them from high to low and assign values of high, medium, and low. Then put them into this funding table. Look at how your work plan, whether it was sufficient or not, your schedule, your budget, and also whether you're claiming DAC program preference. And then order the applications for all the ones that received high on the GHG emission reductions and the water savings and a sufficient agreement component and a DAC program preference. They would be in priority 1. And then we'll work our way down through the applications as putting them in this funding priority. If we can award all $19 million to the applications that fall in priority 1, then we will do that and we'll be done. Okay, so now I'll hand off to Corey Saltzman.
Alrighty. Thank you, Leslie. Again, my name is Corey Saltzman, and I am going to be going over how to submit a 2016 water energy grant proposal, and then I'm also going to be going over what to submit in a 2016 or the attachments that are going to be included in a 2016 water energy grant proposal. So for this solicitation, DWR is using the grants online system. Applicants will be able to open and start a proposal using grants. They'll be able to provide applicable attachments, and then also to submit a completed proposal. Is there anybody here who has never used grants? Never? Okay, good. I was hoping that at least there was one. So the first thing you'll have to do is open an account, and to create an account, there's a helpful video. I'll go back here on the grants homepage. That's there for applicants to utilize if they need to do that. The other thing that you could do is simply go into the sign in button, and then there's also a register now link, and just follow the steps from there. If you are already have a username and password, you've used grants before, you could simply just use that and then log in and start your proposal that way. Okay, so once you've opened the application and you're ready to upload documents to grants, there is a file size limit, and it is 15 megabytes. However, DWR strongly recommends that the user only upload documents or files that are a maximum of 20 megabytes because it kind of bogs down the system if you don't. The PSP directs the applicant to use the following naming convention. They'll use the attachment number followed by the underscore water energy 16 underscore the agency name, and then that attachment name, and then the document number, and then followed by the total number of documents in that attachment. Now, for each attachment, the applicant can only provide 5 total. They could only upload 5 documents to the particular attachment. So if for some reason an attachment has more than 5 documents or files, then they can use a zip folder or zip file, and then all we do is ask is use the same exact naming convention for that as well. Acceptable file formats include Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and PDF. If you do use PDF, we ask that you don't use scanned copies of PDF. You the original, say the original, or use the PDF, the original copy. And then, as always, if you do need assistance or help, you could always contact the grant team through email, or you could contact through the phone number up here. All right, so the first attachment, so once the application and grants, once you have opened an application in grants, there are a number of attachments an applicant will need to provide able to submit a complete application. The first one here is aptly named Attachment 1. As part of Attachment 1, there will be a number of documents that the applicant will need to submit. The first one is an authorization resolution. The PSP provides an example resolution on page 19. That's there for the applicants to utilize if they like. Another document that the applicant will need to provide is a statement that defines whether the applicant is a local agency, a joint powers authority, or a 501c3 nonprofit. In that statement as well, they'll have to declare whether they're a statutory authority to enter into a grant agreement with the state. Other eligibility documentation will include urban and ag water management compliance. As a side note, these were due earlier this year, so the most optimal situation is that if this compliance applies to you as the applicant, you have already submitted this or in the process. And then another one is the groundwater management compliance, followed by surface water diversion compliance, and then also a water metering requirement. So for Attachment 2, we do have a representative from the Air Resources Board. Jamie Tipton is going to go over this more in depth, but I will say this: for the Attachment 2, there's a Part 2A and Part 2B. Part 2A is going to be devoted for the greenhouse gas calculator or the Excel file, and then Part 2B is going to be the accompanying backup documentation that supported the calculator. And so he's going to follow my presentation, so stay tuned with Jamie here. All right, so the next attachment after Attachment 2 is Attachment 3, And the PSP directs the applicant to include a brief project description, and then also a project map that includes relevant project-specific information. And then if applicable, the PSP directs the applicant to provide a list of project proponents that will be receiving grant funds. And then also, the applicant should also include the relevant tasks, which may comprise of a task devoted to project administration, project for planning or design, environmental documentation such as CEQA, and then permitting if that is necessary, a task devoted to project monitoring, and then also a task for implementing the project. Appendix D in the PSP and guidelines provides an example template that's there for the applicants to utilize as well if they want to. To evaluate attachment 3 or the work plan, the technical reviewers will be going over or asking basically 6 questions. The first one is going to be if there was a detailed map included. And then the second one is going to be, does the applicant provide adequate project description? And then also the next question is going to be, is it clear that the tasks in the work plan will result in a completed project? And then does the work plan define the main activities? Do the work plan tasks identify appropriate deliverables? And then the last question is the work plan address CEQA compliance and if any necessary permitting? The next attachment is going to be attachment 4, which is the budget. It's going to include documents for the budget. And the applicant is expected to submit what we call a line item budget. And as well, they're also going to include documentation justifying the costs that are presented in this budget. So the line item budget here has a number of line items. The first one is personnel services. This is basically staff time directly employed by the grantee. And then there's a line item for land easements. This is probably not going to be used too much for this grant, but if you do need it, you could include it there. The next line item is for grantee expenses, and these are going to be for such expenses as maybe document reproduction, office supplies, permitting fees, and also for equipment that costs under $5,000. The next line item is for equipment. This is going to be equipment that costs above $5,000. And then the next line item is for a consultant professional services. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. And then the last one is going to be associated costs to implementing the project. And to evaluate the budget, the technical reviewers are going to be asking 3 questions. The first question is going to be, does the budget estimate contain appropriate hours and rates? The next one is going to be, are the costs presented in the budget reasonable? And the last one is the budget consistent with the work plan and schedule? So the next attachment is going to be attachment 5, which is going to be the schedule. And the schedule for the attachment, the applicant is supposed to provide a brief narrative explaining the readiness and/or project status. In addition, the applicant should provide a detailed and realistic timeline that includes important milestones and also corresponds to the tasks in the work plan. Start dates should assume a date no earlier than March 2017, and the project should end prior or no later than June 2019. To evaluate the schedule or attachment 6 or 5, technical reviewers will be asking 3 questions. They'll be asking, is there sufficient detail to demonstrate the project schedule can be met? Is the project going to be completed prior to June 2019? And is the schedule consistent with the budget and work plan? And moving on to attachment 6, project monitoring. The project monitoring plan should include a description of how the project will be monitored to provide the data to meet the reporting requirements for the Air Resources Board's funding guidelines. Project monitoring will be required on an annual basis, and the grantee will be expected to provide annual updates, among other things, on water savings, greenhouse gas reductions, energy savings, and, if applicable, benefits to the disadvantaged communities. Another important point is all data will be reported down to the census tract level. And then lastly, additional details of the monitoring plan will be worked out during the development of the grant agreement. To evaluate attachment 6, the monitoring plan, technical reviewers will go over a couple of questions. They'll be asking, is the proposed project monitoring plan expected to track progress towards meeting the claim benefits? And the other question will be, does the monitoring plan report all the metrics requested in ARB's funding guidelines? All right, so this is the last attachment, which I will be talking about today. And it's going to be attachment 7 is devoted to the disadvantaged community program preference. And it's important to note that this is the only attachment that is not required. And it's not mandatory. If a project claiming DAC program preference, the project must meet the following 3 conditions. The benefit must be direct, meaningful, and assured. The benefit also must address an important community need, and at least 75% of the grant funding must be allocated to DAC residents. Table 9 on the PSP on page 22 helps guide applicants to help determine whether the grant can claim the disadvantaged community program preference. We'll go through Table 9 on the next couple slides, but before we do, I will mention that the applicant should also provide a map based on Cal EPA's Cal EnviroScreen 2.0 tool. The map should display project locations, DAC census tracts, and the percentage of grant funding that's being devoted for benefiting DACs. So for the Table 9, there are 2 parts. There's a Part A and then there's a Part B. Part A is there's going to be 4 questions. If the applicant is able to answer yes to any of the 4 questions, then they will be able to move on to Part B. If they're unable to answer yes to any of the 4 questions, then they do not qualify for the disadvantaged community program preference, and they should not submit an attachment 7 for the solicitation. Just going through the questions really quick. Question 1 is basically asking, are the benefits for the water users physically located in the disadvantaged community? Question 2, we don't think that there's going to be a yes to this question, but it does ask, will the project improve disadvantaged community infrastructure? And project 3 and 4 are devoted to employment and or job training. So if the applicant is able to answer yes to these questions in Part A, they'll move on to the questions in Part B, where there'll be 3 questions. The applicant must answer all 3 questions in Part B, and the questions will be asking, what is the community need of the project? And then the next one will be, how did the applicant identify the community need? The PSP guidelines offers some suggestions of how an applicant can find a community need. It's not an all-inclusive list, but it's there for suggestions if the applicant needs. The last question is going to be, describe how the project and resulting benefit will address the community need. And to evaluate the attachment 7, the technical reviewers will be going all over 4 questions. And to qualify for the disadvantaged community program preference, they will have to meet all 4 questions. The first one is going to be, does the applicant provide a map that shows at least 75% of the grant funding allocated to DAC census tracts? Another question is going to be, does the applicant identify which criterion that the project meets, and is the explanation reasonable? And then another question is going to be, does the applicant provide a reasonable explanation of how the benefit addresses an important community need and how that community need was identified? And then lastly, does the applicant explain how the funding will be tracked both for the DAC and the non-DAC parts of the project? So that concludes my part of the presentation. Jamie Tipton's going to go more in depth about attachment 2. He'll be going over a couple examples and then showing you how to work out the calculator.
All right, thank you, Corey. Again, my name is Jamie from the Air Resources Board, and today I'm going to be going over the quantification methodology and tool that ARB developed in consultation with DWR. Before I begin, I'd like to note that the quantification methodology and accompanying tool are both available on ARB's auction proceeds homepage. From the homepage, users can link to the quantification materials link and scroll down to DWR's Water Energy Grant Program shown here, which can be found under the Clean Energy and Energy Efficiency section. Both the methodology and tool were updated on September 28th. The methodology was updated with screenshot figures to reflect the calculator tool, and the tool was updated to automate total cost calculations, which I can show later. The quantification materials for this program consist of a quantification methodology, which describes the measures and associated calculations, as well as the GHG Calculator tool, which automates calculations and provides estimates and reporting data. ARB staff followed a set of principles to guide in the development of the quantification methodology, consistent across other ARB quantification methodologies. These principles ensure that the methodology for the Water Energy Grant Program will apply at the project level, align with project measures proposed for funding, estimate GHG emission reductions from direct on-site energy savings, use existing and proven tools where available, and use project-level data. Additionally, the calculator tool has been pre-populated with default values where applicable for convenience of use. The quantification methodology estimates greenhouse gas emissions associated with energy savings from commercial, institutional, and residential project types. GHG emission reductions for this program result from direct on-site energy savings as a result of increased energy efficiency and/or decreased energy use. The quantification methodology also estimates water savings for all eligible project measures. The methodology estimates reductions in savings from a single facility type, that is, buildings designated for a particular use or purpose, such as restaurants. If an applicant wants to fund multiple facility types, they will need to submit separate runs of the accompanying calculator tool. I'll elaborate on this more on the next slide. The GHG calculator tool helps automate the calculations when estimating GHG emission reductions, energy savings, and water savings. As mentioned earlier, the tool is pre-populated with default assumptions and calculations for all eligible project measures. The tool allows for multiple project measures of the same type, but with different operational usage, as well as multiple facilities of the same facility type. The tool also allows users to input both commercial or institutional and residential project measures within the same run of the tool. If an applicant wants to fund multiple commercial or institutional facility types, separate runs of the GHG calculator tool will be required for submission. For example, if an applicant wants to fund multiple restaurants with the same project measures, a single run of the tool would be sufficient. However, if an applicant wants to fund two different facility types, such as hotels and restaurants, two separate runs of the tool would be required, one for each different facility type. I'll demonstrate both of these scenarios in a quick practice example at the end of the presentation. At this point, I want to provide just a brief overview of the steps the user would go through in using the tool. When you first download from the web page and open the GHG Calculator tool, you're brought to the README tab. Here, the user can input the project name, project information, and contact information for the person who can be contacted with project-specific questions. Yellow cells shown up here and throughout the rest of the GHG Calculator tool represent modifiable cells that the users can change. The Inputs tab allow the user to enter the quantity of new measures proposed for installation. Each yellow cell is pre-populated with default assumption values that can be modified to reflect project-specific information. The GHG Calculator tool is configured for both commercial, institutional, and residential project inputs. Note that there are three separate input tabs, which I'll go through later in the examples, which can be used for project proposals proposing the same project type, but with different operational usage for the measures. For example, this would be if a user is proposing to install multiple commercial steam cookers that have different operating hours. Lastly, if applicable, the tool provides associated calculation or calcs tabs for every eligible project measure listed from the inputs tabs. The yellow cells within these tabs can be modified by the users with specific data that is more applicable to the equipment proposed for installation. Lastly, you're brought to the results summary tab. Once you have inputted all of the inputs and project specifications, the GHG calculator tool will automatically estimate energy savings, both in the form of electricity and gas savings, and the resulting GHG emission reductions. The tool will also automatically calculate water savings for the proposed project measures. The results summary tab displays these project results for each measure, both as an annual savings and over the entire project life. And just a note that the project life will vary across different project measures. And finally, lastly, you can go to the Program Summary tab, which provides project metrics and a summary of the overall project costs and benefits for evaluation during project selection. It is important to note that DWR guidelines require all applicants to provide backup documentation for all values used in the inputs or calculation tabs for any proposed measure. This includes unaltered default yellow cells provided by the calculator tool. This backup documentation is used during the review process for staff to replicate and verify the calculations and estimates. And inadequate documentation may deem an application ineligible to receive funds. The Air Resources Board will accept questions from applicants during the application process through the GGRF email shown here. If the same questions are received multiple times by separate applicants, ARB will also post a frequently asked questions document on the Quantification Materials webpage. For more information on ARB's efforts to support the implementation of California climate investments, please visit our auction proceeds webpage. At this point, I'm going to close out of the presentation and go through two brief examples of how to use the tool to estimate energy savings, water savings, and greenhouse gas emission reductions. Just to note, these examples will not provide any of the supporting documentation that will be required from applicants when they submit their proposals. In the, as Corey's setting this up, in the first example, I'm going to walk through a tool for someone who's proposing to install the same or project measures across the same facility type. Again, in this case, it will be hospitals. And then the second example, I'll show two runs of the tool on how the user would use it for multiple facility types, in this case, hotels and restaurants. Users on the web won't be able to see this, but on the side of the room, we're going to keep this slide up while I go through the tool, just so that people can reference it throughout. All right, so once you've opened the tool, downloaded it, and opened, you're brought to the README tab here. When you scroll down, you can find the yellow cells that the user would modify. In this case, for that first project, we're going to do hospitals. And this is where you'd also put the project information for the contact information for people who can be contacted, email, and other important project information. Next, we move down into the funds requested. I'm going to walk through the three cells here. This first cell is asking for total water energy grant funds requested. Again, for this first project, we're going to put in $70,000. The second cell is looking for total GGRF funds requested. So this is both DWR water energy grant funds and any other GGRF funds you may be requesting. For example, if you're receiving funds from an affordable housing and sustainable communities project, say for $30,000, this would become $100,000, including the totals. In this case, we're going to assume that no other GGRF funds are requested and keep the value at $70,000. Again, we'll assume for simplicity no cost share funds, and the tool has been updated to automatically calculate the total cost for the program. Moving on, we'll move to the commercial inputs tabs for this proposed hospital project. In the inputs tabs, you can see all of the eligible project measures that have been listed in DWR's program guidelines. And here we're going to, as stated before, we're going to propose putting in 50 clothes washers, scrolling down to 500 faucets, and 500 shower heads. Again, you can see there's other cells, yellow cells, that are modifiable or can be modified by the usable with more explicit and specific project information. Now, before I move on, I want to move over to the calculations tabs. Here you can see there's a calculations tab for every corresponding inputs tab. If we scroll over to commercial faucets, where we just input data, you can see there are more modifiable yellow cells that can be modified by the user with more specific data of the conventional device or the proposed device for installation. You can also see you can modify guests and employees to something that's more specific. By default, the tool assumes a restaurant type facility where you have employees using showers and guests simply using the bathroom facilities. If that needs to be modified for any reason, you can input that here. One thing not mentioned on the commercial inputs tab is that you can change the number of guests and employees. Again, for simplicity, we'll keep this at an easy number. So as I mentioned, the tool automatically calculates your greenhouse gas emission reductions, water savings, and energy savings, and compiles them in the results summary tab here. As you can see and scroll down, for each project measure, you can see the associated electricity, gas, water savings, and GHG emission reductions. I would like to do an important note here. As you can see, the red cell shows up. This is actually showing that there's a negative value, or in this case, an increase in electricity usage. In this case, this is related to the efficiency of the appliance that's proposed for installation. And if you go back to the commercial washer tab, you can see the modified energy factor here. By default, the tool is pre-populated with a value that assumes the federal standard, but in most cases, the proposed appliance is going to be significantly better than this. So if we change this to 1, for example, oh, excuse me, wrong cell. So modified energy factor, if you change this to a 1, and we go back to the results summary tab, you can see this is no longer a negative value, and you've actually gotten the increase in energy efficiency, and also that copies over into the increased reduced GHG emission reductions. Lastly, just to show you, the program summary tab summarizes everything from the results tabs, including the total funding amount, total emission reductions, electricity savings, and water savings. And again, this is for the selection process. So finally, when saving the tool, make sure to follow the convention, the naming convention specified in DWR's program guidelines, shown here. Since we are only submitting one run of the tool, we would save this as 1 of 1. So I'm going to close out of this quickly and open up a new version of the tool to run through the second example. I'll move a little faster in populating the cells, and we'll skip over that information again. So in the second example, for those who can't see the example before, we're proposing to install in multiple facility types this time. This will be a $70,000 rebate program where $4,000 are proposed to go into hotel facilities and $30,000 proposed to go into restaurant facilities. So in this first one, we'll do restaurants. And again, we'll propose the $40,000 here. We're going to assume no other GGRF funds are requested. And when we move into the inputs tabs, we can populate the cell quickly with the data. Again, this would be 500 faucets and 500 showers, and you can modify any of the other yellow cells here to more project-specific information. Now, when we save this tool, we're going to be changing the naming convention. Since we're doing multiple facility types, we're going to need multiple runs of the GHG calculator tool. In this case, there's only 2, so this will be one of 2. Now, when we change this to our restaurant facility, where we're requesting $30,000 instead of the $40,000, and we are only proposing to replace 500 faucets and no showers. When you save this tool for submission, you will save this as before, the second of 2. And then both of these files you will take and submit with your application. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Leslie to finish off the slides before we get to questions.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay, so we have, after today, we'll post a copy of this broadcast on our website for if you would like to refer to it again. I just wanted to mention that. We have one more applicant workshop on Monday. If you're going to submit an application, please do it by 5 p.m. on November 7th. Our schedule has us making draft awards in mid-January of 2017. Then immediately following that, we will open up for a public comment period on those draft awards and make final awards in March of 2017. Okay, with that, we'll open up the floor to questions.
Thank you. Pam Loomis with Nossaman. And one of my questions on the doing a rebate program, say a residential rebate program in a disadvantaged community, for the monitoring and reporting requirement, will the applicant be allowed to do estimates, or are they going to have to actually track residential use of the residential customers that take advantage of the rebate program?
You'll need to track how many rebates you give out and the types of devices that are included in those rebates in over a year.
And then there'll just be an estimate of what that will result in. So you don't have to actually monitor the electricity usage of residential customers who get your new faucets under the rebate program or something like that.
Correct. You'll use the calculator, the greenhouse gas emission calculator, to create the estimate.
And that was another question I had when you were going through the calculator. It looks like the calculator itself has a floor that it's comparing certain appliances to come up with the savings. So in your application, you don't actually have to show what actual usage is and what reductions will be accomplished. It will all be via the calculator.
Yes.
Okay. And one more question. For a nonprofit single facility, do they have to be replacing infrastructure, or if they need to expand and are putting in new infrastructure, would that new, say, faucets or showers or commercial ice maker be eligible for the grant money, or do they have to show that they're replacing old, outdated appliances?
Replacing old, outdated.
They need to show they're replacing.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions in the room? Yes.
Hi, Christina Cullen with Sac State. Couple questions. Can you give an example of what backup documentation would look like, particularly for cells, the yellow cells we're not modifying? You said if we were to keep your default values, I mean, can you just run through what types of attachments you're looking for? And then I have another question after this, please.
Sure. So in the calculator, there's basically kind of a line across in most cases where you'll be entering in the yellow cells or just leaving it as the default. We're looking at backup documentation for all the values for whatever the cells are modifiable. And in some cases, it might be you'll have to measure usage if you can't measure usage, because possibly, let's for example, it's cost prohibitive. Then you can mention that, and that's why you're using it. I think the basic idea is to reward thoroughness and reduce cherry picking. Basically, if you have a better answer, not to use that. We want real world values.
So usage would be a utility bill or something.
That could possibly be it, or a
nature.
sample.
A sample we've monitored.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if the specifications for the equipment that you're going to use match the default, then you just attach a copy of that.
Okay, thank you. My second question is actually based on a scenario. So my team and I were playing around with the tool, and our particular scenario is we're wanting to replace bathroom faucets, and our population of faucets have different aerator types. So what we're trying to figure out is, I was hoping, we could run through a scenario of like what that would look like when we've got multiple aerator types already in place, and then we're proposing to change those aerators out with, one aerator size across the board. There are different numbers in each aerator type, and we were noticing on the calcs page that would be for the faucets, for example, and it gives you your water consumption from conventional, and then the retrofit, and then the savings. We were noticing it wasn't showing accurate numbers, in that it's using like number of guests across the board total, like number of users total, but the number of faucets we have under one aerator type is greater than, let's say, another sample. So the bathroom retrofit water consumption numbers shouldn't show the same, and your tool is showing it the same.
So so to understand, so you're using different aerators at different locations, and there's different numbers of users at these different locations.
Correct.
So in that example, you could aggregate and create a average, and then show your work why you put in that value you did into the cell.
Would you recommend, if let's say we have 5 aerator types, would you recommend that we aggregate for all of those and just take a mean? Let's, say 0.5 is now going to be the mean aerator type, or 1.5, rather than individualizing each of those.
You could do it both ways, but it's probably going to be easier to take the average. Again, show your work why you put the average in there. The average aerator, the average water usage rate. That answer your question?
I think so. I may come back, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Again, if you have more detail, we can talk on the side too.
Thank you.
Any other questions in the room? Okay, we'll go to the email.
All right. So the first email we have from Samantha with the LA Department of Water and Power. She have quite 5 questions, so I'm just going to go one by one. Her first question is, are Energy Star appliances required, or can non-Star appliances be used?
Yes, yes, you can use non-Energy Star appliances.
Okay, second question, do continuous bath turner washer UN hotel qualify as commercial clothes washers?
If you can modify the values, the yellow cells, and provide the backup documentation that supports those values, then yes.
Okay, what's the difference between commercial and industrial operation with respect to clothes washing operation? Does a uniform supply company with tunnel washer qualify as commercial?
So we're funding commercial and institutional facility types, not industrial. So please refer to the definition in Appendix B of what institutional means. And if the, again, if you can modify the yellow cells in the calculator and have the backup documentation to support it, then and it's a commercial clothes washer, it qualifies.
Do commercial appliance leasing companies that lease and distribute clothes washer and multifamily residential units qualify as commercial clothes washer for a commercial rebate program?
So the leasing company wouldn't qualify as an eligible applicant. And I think that we will take your email and we'll respond in more detail individually to that question.
Would a system that work with commercial washer and reuse water qualify for this program? For example, of this type of equipment is a aqua recycle system being used at a Lowy hotel in Santa Monica.
And again, I think we'll get back to this question on the side.
Okay. Next, we have Lear from Urban Corp of San Diego County. She has two questions. Her first question is, will applicant need to create or follow an existing application process for deciding who in their jurisdiction will receive appliance replacement? For example, would a residential of a DAC need to apply for a replacement dishwasher or clothes washer?
Can you repeat the question again?
Will applicant need to create or follow an existing application process for deciding who is in their jurisdiction will receive appliance replacement? For example, would a residential of a DSC needs to apply for a replacement dishwasher or a clothes washer?
So I think how this question is reading, and if we're wrong, you could email us back, but there's going to be one applicant per proposal.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to, residents are not eligible to be eligible for this proposal. So the applicant is going to have to do the work ahead of time to determine what project measures that they're going to have to replace, or they're going to plan to replace, and how many, if it's going to be a rebate program, how many rebates.
Her second question is, what happened to the old appliances that replaced through this program? Is disposal, recycling, and eligible cost?
I don't believe it is. But let me check and we'll email that answer out to the web.
Next, we have Christine from Ecology Action, and her question is, can you change commercial clothes and washer calculation tab on E37, which refer to laundromats? How do we explain our commercial washing machine is something other than laundromat, like hotel or hospital?
If it fits within the default values and you can provide the backup documentation. And we'll email this person back specifically too.
Next, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have a hard time to pronounce this name, but Yushrila from Water Conservation Program. And if we do capture data on an existing technology, can we use that data to determine water, energy, GHG saving versus the calculator factor for the new technology?
If it's used as backup documentation in the existing calculator, you could use it possibly. We'll email back. We'll look into this question too and email back this question too.
Okay, next we have Jeremiah from West Basin MWD. And the question is, does the faucet divide measure include retrofit installation for reduced flow rate, faucet aeration, and under the sink flow restriction as well?
Yes, it does.
Next we have Christine again. If we need to provide backup documentation for all yellow modified cell, can you please provide the citation for research studies ARB used for the default in the cells?
I believe it's in the quantification methodology. Is that correct, Jamie?
Yeah, every tab you see on the quantification methodology, or in the tool, at the bottom has a link to all the references for the defaults and standards that were assumed and used throughout the tool.
Kristen again, can you please repeat the second city of LA question about commercial washer? We could not understand what their equipment in question was.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll post these questions on the web with answers.
Next we have David, and the question is, am I correct in that this grant only applies to applicants that show energy saving on the site, not upstream from a site? Have project that will save energy from cities supplying water by significantly reduce water consumption?
This program is focused on direct on-site water and energy savings.
Next, we have Christian from Sacramento State University. What is the difference between guest and employee? For example, are students attending college considered employees or guests? Also, who are those living in the resident hall considered?
They can be. As a default, they're using examples for commercial settings, but for institutional settings, students certainly can be used as well.
And that was the last question on email.
Okay, great. Okay, again, so we'll post these questions that we got on the web and provide written answers so it's more clear. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for coming.